I want us to turn to the book of Exodus, the 33rd chapter, and begin reading with verse 1. Exodus chapter 33, beginning with verse 1. And the Lord said unto Moses, Depart, and go up hence, thou and the people which thou hast brought up out of the land of Egypt, unto the land which I sware unto Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, Unto thy seed will I give it. And I will send an angel before thee, and I will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. For I will not go up in the midst of thee, for thou art a stiff-necked people, lest I consume thee in the way. I'm going to jump down to the 13th verse. Moses had prayed here and talked with the Lord. Said, Now therefore I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. You notice he puts it back. God said, Moses, bring your people out. And now Moses said, Now Lord, they're thy people. And God said, and he said, My presence shall go with thee. He changed it there, and I will give thee rest. And he said unto him, If thy presence go not with me, carry us not up hence. Let's see, maybe I would read a couple verses more. For wherein shall it be known here that I and thy people found grace in thy sight, if it is not in that thou goest with us? So shall we be separated, I and thy people, from all the people that are on the face of the earth. And the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken, for thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his precious word. I want to give just a little bit of background here, Moses, before I get into this scripture here too much. If you remember the story of Moses, how that he was, his mother put him in a little basket there at the water's edge, and Pharaoh's daughter came down, saw him, and took him and raised him as her son. And Moses was trained in all the wisdom of Egypt. He grew up as Pharaoh's daughter, the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And he had wealth, he had prestige, he had everything. I don't know of anything that he didn't have that he wanted, or he could have gotten. As the saying goes nowadays, he had it made. Now, when he killed an Egyptian trying to deliver God's people at the age of 40, you remember, he fled into the wilderness and stayed there 40 years. When he fled, when Egypt, he thought he had everything. But when he fled, he thought he lost everything. Now, neither one were true. So he stayed on the backside of the desert 40 years, and God appeared to him, remember, at 80 years of age in a burning bush. And God said, Now, Moses, don't come near me. You're on holy ground. I want you to see something. Madame Guyon drew attention to this, that later on he had got to know God's presence so much. God came down on the mountain in a fire, and God said, Moses, come right on into the fire with me. Now, don't you tell everybody else to stay away, but you come right on into the fire with me. When he saw him in the burning bush, God said, don't you come near me. But now God said, come right on into the fire with me. And he went into the fire and stayed with him for 40 days. Well, I want you to notice, as I said, it looked like he'd lost everything. He'd tended sheep for 40 years. Now, Moses is leading the children of Israel out of the desert, out into the desert. And he went up on the mountain to get the 10 Commandments. And if you remember there, the children of Israel made a golden calf and began to worship. And God said to Moses here, when he came back down, because of this sin, God said to Moses, I want you to know I'm not going to go with you now to Canaan. Your sin has been so great. However, God said, what I'll do, I'll send an angel before you. And I'll have this angel drive out all the enemies, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Hivites, the Amorites, everything, and I'll have this angel drive everything out for you so you can have an easy victory. The land will be yours, a land flowing with milk and honey. And I want you to know I'm going to let you have Canaan and all of its blessings. My presence won't go with you. And Moses said, it isn't enough. He said, if your presence doesn't go with us, don't carry us up hence. I don't want Canaan. Imagine the thing that God had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'll take you to a land and give it to you. And Moses said, I don't want it. He said, if your presence doesn't go with us, don't you carry me one step farther toward Canaan. I'd rather stay with you in the wilderness. It's worth more than all of Canaan. Canaan is worthless without your presence. He said, I don't want to take one step farther without your presence. Your presence is more valuable than everything in the world. In Egypt, he thought he had everything. When he fled, he thought he lost everything, but now he found everything. In the wilderness, he found it. He had God's presence, and he said, don't you send me up into Canaan without your presence. I don't want the angel. I don't want Canaan. I don't want the land of milk and honey. I don't want all the blessings. I don't want any of it. Can you imagine a man telling God that? That he didn't want Canaan? And this is exactly what Moses said to God. He said, I don't want it. And God said, I'll send an angel before you, and I'll drive out all the enemies, and I'll give you the blessings of the land, but not my presence. And Moses said, that's not enough. Moses said, I don't want any of it without your presence. What good is Canaan without the presence of the Lord? So I look at that and I think today, how many people today want the blessings of Canaan? They want the angels, they want the miracles, they want the victories, they want the blessings. And here in the wilderness, God promised Moses all of this. All that people often come to the house of God and want. God said, Moses, I'll give it all to you. And he said, it isn't enough. I don't want it. What do we come to church for? Here in the wilderness, God promised Moses all of these, and Moses said, it's not enough, it's worthless without your presence. If he had God's presence, he had everything. Even in the wilderness, he said, it's better in this barren land to have you and forget all the blessings of Canaan. You remember they came back, 2 men carrying a bunch of grapes on their shoulder. It was so big, and Moses said, keep it, I don't want it. Imagine. He said, your presence in this barren land is worth more than that bunch of grapes. I suppose if you were to ask most people, I'm going to get pretty close, is that all right? I think you can ask most people, do you want God's presence? Well, I think almost everybody would say yes. Don't you think they would say yes? I want God's presence. Well, I hope they do. But when I think that God said, and He has promised, God said, well, Larry encouraged you to do it. God said, I'll be with thee on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. God said, I'll be with you. I'll be with you Sunday night. And I'll be with you. God said, my presence is going to be there Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. Do you want, how much do you want God's presence? What is it that keeps us away? I told you I was going to get close. How many blessings do we want from God? But His presence, He promised His presence to be here. That's what we've got in the choir. It's His presence.
He said, I'll be with you. And that's what you're enjoying when you hear them sing. I thought I heard this morning some beautiful tones come out of that choir. Toward the end there, I don't think it seemed like it was more beautiful than anything I'd ever heard in my life. I don't know if anybody was hearing what I was hearing or not, but I sat there and I just listened. I marveled. I didn't want that tone to end. I didn't want it to end. Why? God's presence. He said, I'll be with you. Do you want God's presence? Or how many times I know there are times we have to miss church. I know there's sickness, there's work, there's different things, times even getting away from a vacation for rest. But I'm talking about the things that keep people away, picnics and ball games and all the things. And yet God said, my presence is going to be there. And we said, Lord, I'll take that some other time, but I'd rather have this blessing right here now. And Moses said, you keep the blessing, God, I want your presence. How many times do people miss church? And God said, I'll be with you. My presence will be there. See, sometimes this is why people, isn't it an amazing thing that people think Brother Helm is odd? And yet he won't hold a revival any place, and God says, I'll be with thee. He said, I'll go. God says he'll be with us. And he won't hold a revival. You think, well, it'd be wonderful to hold a revival anywhere, everywhere, all the time, try to get people saved. He said, God, if your presence don't go with me, I won't go down there and hold a revival meeting anywhere in the world unless your presence will go with me. And yet people think the man is odd. Imagine. So, how much do we value his presence? What a marvelous land Canaan was. God said, I'll give it to you, Moses, and everything in it, all that you've wanted. And yet Moses refused to take it. Moses found that being in this bleak, barren wilderness was better than all the land of Egypt. It says in Hebrews 11:25, Moses chose to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. And Hebrews 11:26, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than treasures of Egypt. Oh, my Lord and my God, have mercy on us if we could have that vision and that understanding. No wonder God said to Moses upon the mount, come on up with me and come into the fire with me. You want my presence? Come into the fire with me. Look at here and let me read it to you in Exodus, the 19th chapter. In the 17th verses. Starting with verse 17. Moses said, brought forth the people out of the camp. They met God and stood on another part of the mount. And Mount Sinai was altogether on smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. And the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mount, and the Lord called Moses up to the mount, and Moses went up. Look in the 24th chapter, starting with verse 15. And Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount, and the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And the seventh day called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud, and the sight of the glory of the Lord was like devouring fire on top of the mount in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went into the midst of the clouds and gat him up into the mount. And Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. God said, Moses, just come right on into the fire with me. You like my presence so much, you'll not get burned this time. Glory. You want an experience like that, then desire his presence. Hard telling what you'll get into. What a wonderful God we're serving. What a privilege it is to have God's presence. I marvel that God should come down and walk in our services. I marvel at that. That's the most precious thing in all the world. That's greater than any service anywhere in the world. That with all of its blessings, and yet people will go to services all over the world looking for promised blessings. And Moses said, I want your presence. You keep them all. And God has promised His presence with us. And I marvel that God would come down and walk in our midst and sing through our choir, and the playing of the instruments and the preaching of the Word, how God helps in the services. I marvel that God's presence should be with us. How wonderful when God says, I will be with thee. Do we value that? So Moses, it says, took the tabernacle outside the camp after they made that golden calf. And all that sought the Lord went out with him, and there they repented of their sins. And since they repented of their sins, God turned around, reversed it, and said, all right, I'll go with thee. And Moses knew that Canaan wouldn't mean a thing without the presence of the Lord with him. And God said, I'll give the angel to guide thee. And Moses said, it won't do. If you have God's presence, you have everything you need. How wonderful if parents could realize that. If parents could give their children God's presence, they'd give them the most valuable thing in all the world. If there could be God's presence in the home, the children couldn't be any better place in all the world. And yet many times parents try to give their children this and that, and those are all wonderful. I'm not against any of that. But the most precious thing the poorest person in all the world can give their children the presence of God, which is more valuable than anything the wealthiest man in the world could give his child. If you have God's presence, you have everything you need. There isn't anything you need that you don't have if you've got God's presence. How wonderful for God to say, I will be with thee in Scott Depot Christ Fellowship. What a wonderful thing that is. My, oh my, oh my. God will witness, I will be with thee. Brother, I tell you, we ought to run to get here every time these doors are open. If we want His presence, He's promised to be with us. Just to be in His presence, you say, oh, I'm coming for, no, I'm not coming for the blessings, I'm coming for the presence of God. If I get into that, I've got everything. Everything I need. So I'm trusting that God will help us. I'm encouraged because I believe that you, dear ones, want God's presence. I believe you do. But I'm just bringing this message to encourage us to keep on desiring His presence, to keep on looking for it above all the blessings that God can promise and all the blessings that are promised anywhere in the world and in meetings and great meetings and all this going on. I'm thankful for all. I'm thankful for Canaan. I'm thankful for all that's in it. I'm thankful for the grapes that can be carried back that big. I'm thankful for the blessings that God gives us, but most of all, and God has said, I will be with thee in Scott Depot, and that's the most precious thing in all the world.